Well, some people actually like to do puzzles. And before we had kids, Michelle and I would do puzzles on occasion, and she's actually a way better puzzler than I. So one time we got up to one of those 1,000-piece jobbers because our life was just that exciting. Right? And you know, as the kids grow up, they get the different size puzzles, right? So, and then over the years, I don't know if this happens at your house, happens at our house, the puzzle pieces get separated from the box and they end up in a Ziploc bag. And then the Ziploc bag gets separated from the picture, and then you basically just have a Ziploc bag of frustration is what you have. Right? Because trying to figure out what the puzzle is, you got this piece and there's no picture to go with it, it's just frustrating. And that's exactly why we're doing the story this year. The story gives us the big picture. It gives us the box top. The story is not a replacement of the Bible. It's abbreviated, it's all scripture, it's put in chronological order, and the reason we're going through this is because it's a resource to help us understand the Bible, to understand the capital S story, so that we don't just read the Bible as individual puzzle pieces, like I'm looking at this one verse and I'm looking at this one story, and it's completely out of context from the rest of the story. Have you ever wondered how it is that the Bible has been used and is still used to justify horrible things, that the Bible has been used to justify things like slavery and prejudice, that the Bible has been used to justify things like misogyny and the oppression of women, that the Bible has been used to justify horrible atrocities? You know how that happens? You take one puzzle piece out of context from the big picture, and you can make the Bible say anything that you want it to say. And that's why we absolutely need the story. The story takes the Bible from confusion to enlightenment. Reading the Bible through the story takes it from a weapon that it can be used to isolate people and attack people to something that becomes beautiful and inclusive. Reading the Bible through the story changes it from just facts to a furious love affair with God. It changes it from just a religious textbook to this vibrant relationship with the author of the story. We need the story. And we're learning how to read the Bible together. We're doing this overview from Genesis to Revelation because all the smaller S stories that occur in the Bible, they are happening in a continuum. They are happening in a larger unfolding story, and we need that box top. We need that big picture. And as we walk through the story this year, there's going to be 4 words that come up over and over and over again: creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. In other words, the capital S story is a 4-act play. And say these with me: creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. And last week, Dan talked about creation, and he talked about the fall, and that there was a series of big bangs. That the book of Genesis isn't really designed to be a science manual about the how. It's meant to be a theological explanation of the who and the why. And in the beginning, God created. In other words, he is the ultimate source of cosmic constants and kittens. He is the source of the earth and emus. He is the source of galaxies and groundhogs. And I'm hoping he sees his shadow, right? Pugsatoni Phil. That he is the source of photonic particles and precious people. And creation tells us that in the beginning God created, and he said, "It is good." You know, we learned about original sin last week, but the original blessing is more original than the original sin. You're created with the imago Dei, the image of God stamped on you. And that was the first big bang. And part of having God's image stamped on us means this: that God in his sovereignty has extended some of his sovereignty to us. And Dan talked about how we have the power of free will. And in the next part, in the fall, or what Dan called the rebellion, we see Adam and Eve, and they make a deliberate decision to use their free will. And rather than trusting that God actually knows better, that God is the source of what is right and just and true and wise, they said, you know what? We know better. And I want what I want. And what's interesting about the story of Adam and Eve is it is something that's happened, but it is still happening all the time, because I did that this week too. There are moments this week where I chose, you know what, I think I know better than God. I'm going to choose self. I'm going to choose pride. I'm going to choose me over God and others. Anyone else do that this week too? And what the Bible says is that introduced a new element into the story. You can think of it like a virus or a sickness or like a cancer. And this thing called sin, it ruptured literally our souls, so we're not at peace with ourselves. There's a lot of us that even have trouble sleeping at night because of the voices of fear and shame and anxiety. And we ruptured our relationship with each other. That's why there's so much conflict in the world. And it even had a ripple effect out into creation because a lot of us, even if we don't mean to, it's like we end up using this great gift that God's given us as creation is like, just raw materials that we use to do whatever we want with, and we're not really stewarding the environment. And so we live with like the consequences of all these things. And so now this cancer has entered the story, and the question is, what is God gonna do? Because it's been creation, it's been fall, and this week we're gonna pick up right here, redemption. How is God gonna step into this mess? What is his plan to bring the light into the darkness? And here's the big idea for this whole series. Write it down. It's this. God's greatest desire and ultimate effort is to redeem us and restore relationship with us. That's what God's up to. He's going to step down into the middle of this mess, into the middle of this rebellion, with the divine purpose of redemption and restoration. And in this part of the story, when the redemption part of the story begins, God starts his plan of redemption by creating what you could call a redemptive covenant community. He picks one man and one woman, Abram and Sarai, who later, their names are changed to Abraham and Sarah, because they're given a new identity. God says, here's my plan. I'm going to build a nation, a new tribe, a new people, and they will be qualitatively different from all the other nations in the world. I'm going to invite them to join me in my plan to redeem and restore all nations and all of creation. And he starts this new nation, this new people, by creating what's called a covenant. And this is going to be an important word today, and I want you to write this down. Here's today's big idea. God is a covenant maker and a covenant keeper. This is the secret word for the day. So if you watch Pee-wee's Playhouse, you can scream when I say it. He's a covenant maker and a covenant keeper. And a covenant is a fairly foreign concept to us. In some states, it's actually easier to get out of a marriage covenant than it is a used car deal. So we're going to have to do some work to understand what a covenant is. So here's the definition. A covenant is a means to establishing a binding relationship where none existed before, based on faithfulness to a solemn vow. God says to Abraham and Sarah, I will be your God and you will be my people. And I'm inviting you to join me in my mission to bring redemption and restoration. And we're going to base this on a covenant. And the covenant is a serious deal. I'm not talking about, hey, guess what? I can't wait to leave U-verse because Google Fiber is coming. Ooh. Right? I'm done with Netflix because I got Amazon Prime. It's all good. This is much, much deeper. In fact, the first time I think I started to wrap my mind around what a covenant was when I was 11 years old. My best friend was Mike Paris. And you remember when you're 11, like your best friend, that's your most important relationship in the world. I mean, you're like buds, you're best friends, you do life together. And Mike Paris and I, we were really into the old Clint Eastwood movies. We loved the old spaghetti westerns, Two Mules for Sister Sarah, Fistful of Dollars, the good, the bad, the ugly. And we were like, man, this is when a man is a man. I want to be like this man right here. Now, I know some of you are a little bit older and you grew up with John Wayne. You may have like a preference for John Wayne, but just a quick question. Ask yourself, if John Wayne and Clint Eastwood threw down, who would win? Come on. How many of you think John Wayne? Go ahead. All right, a few of you. How many of you think Clint Eastwood? Actually, you're all wrong. Chuck Norris would actually win. I've been waiting like 2 days to use that one. It is awesome. I will be here all week. It's going to be great. And so in one of these Clint Eastwood movies, it's actually The Outlaw Josie Wales. There's a scene where he's playing Josie Wales, and his best friend is Ten Bear, I think is his name. And they make a blood pact. It is a solemn vow, it's a covenant, and literally, we will be with each other even if it costs us our lives. And they get out their daggers, and they cut their palms open, and blood's dripping down, and they lock hands, and they mix blood, and now they are blood brothers. And when Mike Parris and I saw that, we said, that's what we need to do. We are going to be blood brothers. And we went out to his garage, and we got out our pocket knives, and we put the tips of those blades into our flesh, and then we realized, we're really not that committed. It's really not that. It's not like that. So we put the knives away. We did this. We got out safety pins, and we picked the tip of our fingers. And there was a single drop of blood, and we were like, friends forever. A tiny little blood pack, you know. That's a covenant, right? And you know, most theologians will tell you that a covenant, actually a blood pact, an unbinding, or rather a binding relationship based on a solemn vow, is actually the spine of the story. It's the predominant theme of the story. We can't understand the capital S story if we don't understand this covenant. And God is starting with a man and a woman. He's going to build a new nation that are going to join him in this redemption plan. And the covenant process begins here in Genesis. Let's read it together. Chapter 11, verse 29. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, your father's household, to the land I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation. And this is where the whole point of the covenant gets expressed. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. God is on this pursuit. It's his ultimate effort, and he's going to create a nation who will join him in this redemption plan. And they will be a nation that is just extraordinarily different from all the other nations that existed on the earth at the time. We're going to look at three qualities of the covenant, three qualities of this nation. And just so you know, spoiler alert, Jesus has invited all of us into this nation. It's called the kingdom of God. It's called the family of God. And yes, in this point of the story, it was uni-ethnic. It was one nation in terms of ethnicity. But now, since Jesus' death and resurrection, the doors are blown wide open. It's come one, come all. Join this nation that will join God in redeeming and restoring what is broken and sin-sick in this world. So you're invited to these characteristics. And for every single one of these characteristics of the covenant, there's also a question for us to ponder. So here's the first one, write it down. This covenant is missionally propelled. There's a mission that's like the nitro fuel that this covenant runs on. It's like the heartbeat that pumps the blood into this nation called the people of God. And I want you to notice something. It says, the Lord said to Abram, I will bless you. So this is what you could call the upper story. In other words, this is capital S story, and God is inviting us to step up into his story and let his story become our dominating story that gives us our identity, our meaning, our purpose. And he says, I will bless you. That is the upper story that is coming from God to us. And then he speaks to Abraham down where he is, and this down here, go, you will be a blessing. This is like the lower story. Abraham is living in his world. And God is coming from his upper story, inviting Abraham to take his lower story to join the upper story. And these words right here, I will bless you. There is a historic shift that is going on underneath these words. It's like the tectonic plates are colliding underneath that are literally going to change history. And to understand how significant these words are, you know, we have to understand the culture that Abraham was in. This is 2000 BC. And the only option on the table at the time, in terms of where is human consciousness, where is human civilization at, is polytheism. And you know what? They didn't even think of history like we think of it. One of the gifts of the Jews is the idea that history is actually going somewhere. So they not only changed history, they actually gave us the idea of history itself, that there's a trajectory. Because in the old world, prior to this moment, you know what everything was? It was just a great circle. It was just a great wheel that was spinning over and over and over again. There weren't any new events. It was the same events happening over and over again. And the gods, the little g gods, are up there, and the rest of us are down here, and you're born into a certain strata, and guess what? You're never leaving that strata, and none of your children are ever leaving that strata. You've been assigned that. You're in the wheel, and you're just going to keep walking on this wheel that repeats over and over and over again. And the gods are up there, and they're angry, and they need to be appeased. It's a magical, mythical worldview. These events are happening. We don't understand why. Pre-scientific revolution, they don't know about the forces of nature. They just think there's these invisible G gods that are causing, the winter, and it makes the sun go up and go down. And if I don't appease these fickle gods, they might not give me a harvest next year. They might smite my child with a disease. And so what polytheism creates when you're stuck in a wheel is a lot of anxiety, because you have to make sacrifice to appease the gods. And you never know if it's enough. This was the only option on the planet at this point in time in history. And then these words come: I will bless you. The little g gods were never, ever for you. You were dust underneath their feet at best. And into this environment of polytheistic anxiety comes a voice, the voice of the one true living God, who a little later in the story will say, my name is I am. Moses says, what's your name? And I love this. I am. Like, your name? I am. In other words, I am ultimate reality. I am the ground of being. I am the one God without boundary. I am God. I am one. And this God speaks, and the first thing he says to Abraham is this: I am for you. Abraham hadn't made any sacrifice. He hadn't done anything to appease this God. And this God says, out of sheer innate goodness, I am for you. And this is a breakout in what emerges here is monotheistic love. And you can write this down. This is the shift in the story. The story shifts from polytheistic anxiety, that's all humanity had on the table, and then boom, what breaks through? Universal monotheistic love, and it changes everything. This God from his upper story says, Abram, I am for you. And then we see the full revelation of it in Jesus, who gave love a name, and he gave love a face. And in Christ, all are called to know, get this, that God is for you. He's not just for humanity in a generic, vague sort of way. I'm talking to you. God is for you. God is biased about you. He is for you. He is prejudiced about you. He is for you. He is totally discriminatory. He is for you. God is for you. His basic posture towards humanity is this: I will bless you. And that changes everything. And when you get this forness, when you realize actually the number one value in your life is just letting God love you, and here's the thing about it, it's totally unfair. Because we didn't earn it, and we certainly don't deserve it. But he gives it to us anyway, because of who he is. See, mission doesn't start with God saying, you go do some stuff. It starts with his heart saying, I am for you. And then what does he do? He invites Abraham to join him in this mission. And here's the question I want you to consider. What is my next step in joining you on mission? Because he says to Abraham, I will bless you. And then what does he say to him? You go be a blessing. He basically says, go bless you. You know when you sneeze, you say, God bless you, right? He's saying, go bless you. In other words, take this forness that I'm giving to you, and I want you to carry my forness, new word, F-O-R-N-E-S-S. I want you to extend this to other people. Go bless you. And so what does that look like? Well, there's one Westsider, he's been buying 10 plus copies of the story every week. And on week 2, one of our staff people, Joe, said, hey, I'm curious, you've bought a lot of these. What are you doing with these? And he said, I'm finding joy and freedom in this story, and I want my family and my friends and my neighbors and coworkers to find joy and freedom in the story. So guess what? He's going on like 50 plus copies of the story. So Joe asked him, he's like, you still handing these out to like your friends and family? He's like, no, they ran out a while ago. I just figure every week I'm going to meet someone who needs the joy and the freedom of the story. See, that's called go bless you. Someone who gets God is for me, and they want to extend that forness to others. Another friend of mine last week on Facebook put a little post. He said, hey, if you're a single mom, you need an oil change and a new set of wipers, I've set up appointments with my mechanic. Just message me. That's called go bless you. Is that cool or what? Listen, one of the things we're doing as a Westside family, in a couple Fridays, we're hosting an alternative prom event for older teens with special needs. That's called Go Bless You. Is that cool or what? You could be a part of that if you want to volunteer to be a part of that party. Also, you know what? A week after that, we're hosting a get-together for the people of Kansas City. We're trying to marshal the people of Kansas City together against human trafficking. We actually have a human trafficking conference/summit. Why? Because we're in that fight, that's why. Because God is for those people that are being oppressed, and we won't stand for it, and you're invited to that. That's what it means to go bless you. We care for 1,000 orphans in South Africa and India and Thailand and Laos, and we have a whole new wave of teams that are going out this year. You could spend a week and a half walking alongside an orphan, communicating to them God is for you in a tangible way. There's an information meeting on that coming up February 7th, right after this last service. See, go bless you. And I want to ask you to ask yourself, what is my next step in joining you on mission? And maybe for some of us, the first thing is we just need to let God love us. We need to receive the forness that God has for us. You heard in the pulse about those lifelines, and sometimes we get to a place where we're just stuck. Where there's these habits and hang-ups, and we feel like those define us. And maybe for some of you, that would just be the most courageous thing you could do, is just actually step out into community and let God love you as you are, and that the people of God could make that love tangible just to meet you right where you're at. For some of you, your heart started beating, maybe during when I'm talking about that human trafficking event or the alternative prom event or those mission trips. Or you know what? It can just start right where you live, work, and play. You just begin in prayer. You listen to people. You eat with them and share meals. You serve them and you share your story. And that's the first question. And what separates this nation from the other nations? We're propelled by the mission of God, the forness of God. Oh, here's the second quality. Write this down. It's this. The covenant is shockingly inclusive. The covenant is shockingly inclusive. Now, on a surface reading of this story, here's God, and he's going to start literally with one man and one woman, and it's one nation, and that's how he's going to choose to redeem the world. It feels very narrow. It feels very exclusive at a surface reading. It's like, what kind of plan is that? One man, one woman, and then one nation? Now, why would God do that? Well, think about it this way. If you wanted to change the culture at your work, here's a great plan. Sit down and write a very awesome email that explains all the things that need to change at work, and then send the email to everybody you work with. How many think it would just change your work culture overnight? I mean, it'd be a new day tomorrow. No, you'd have a lot of people who don't like you more tomorrow, right? If you're actually going to change the culture, you would need to experience whatever that culture is personally. And then you would probably start with one or two people. Try to infect them with this vision, with this new set of values. And you would ask them to help you in the process and infect other people. It's kind of like yeast in the dough. And friends, this is the way God works, and it's beautiful. It isn't this mandated, top-down, I'm going to force you all to do this. No, he comes down to one man and one woman. He's like, I'm going to start here, and we're going to do this bottom up. And we're going to do it one life at a time. And guess what? Jesus is still doing that today. He wants to start with you. And then get you in a little community of people that want to love Jesus, become like Jesus, and share Jesus. That's called church. Coming to an event isn't church. Church is not an event. It's not a program. It's a people in community, joining God on mission. And God is showing us what that looks like right here. And I think it's beautiful. And you know what else? If you think God is exclusive in the way he's working, then you're missing something that's totally blatant and obvious. The outcome is what? What does it say? Circle these words. All what? Peoples. Now, all in the Hebrew actually means all. And peoples, it seems like, is that like a typo? They dropped the extra S in there? Like, does it mean a lot of peoples, or what does that mean? And actually, in the original language, it's referring to ethnic groups. So we have like 200-something geopolitical nations. But within those nations, if you ask an anthropologist, there's about 24,000 people groups in the world. So you can have lots of people groups within a geopolitical nation. You tracking? That's what this is talking about. God is saying, you want to know what my family's going to look like? Like if I pull out my wallet and show you all the pictures, it's people from every tribe, every tongue, every nation, every culture, every subculture is going to get in on this. I'm not going to force anyone, but I'm telling you in advance, because I am God, I'm going to have people who choose and say yes to be a part of this mission from every culture and subculture. It's going to happen. We're seeing the restoration piece, the ultimate restoration being promised here. So who benefits? All peoples. That's why it's sort of funny when people say, man, that God of the Bible is so narrow. I'm like, have you actually read the Bible? Because here's the thing. Here's what we want to do with God. We want God to be associated with our tribe and our nation and our group, right? And that's what was going on in Abraham's culture at the time. It was violent tribalism. So we had our little ethnic group, our little tribe. We had our God, and then we rape and pillage and plunder against that tribe, right? And it's a zero-sum game, and it's vicious, and it's competitive. I don't look at the other tribes as my neighbor. I look at them as a threat, as an enemy. In other words, it's exactly what it's like when I play Monopoly. I'm a nice guy until I play Monopoly, and then I'm a killer. And here's the thing. I think God is on my side. God and I are going to beat you at Monopoly. Anyone else? Yeah, I'm the only one. Right. Bunch of liars. And see, that was the only option on the table at the time, was this kind of violent tribalism and us versus them. And God shows up and says, Abraham, this nation's going to be extraordinarily different. It's going to be us for them. The story shifts humanity from us versus them to us for them. And those other tribes that you used to see as foreigners or threats or your enemy, I want you to go bless them. I want you to see them as your neighbor. And God here is trying to expand Abraham's heart. Remember in The Grinch, it says that last day his heart expanded 3 times. Boop, 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 boop. That's what God is going to do to Abraham, and it's what he wants to do to us. He wants our hearts to grow larger. See, default mode is we're born with kind of this egocentric me, me, me. No one has to teach a 2-year-old to say mine. They figure it out all by themselves. And then as we get older, our hearts get a little bit bigger and we become ethnocentric, and it's us. In other words, we define our tribe. This is us, and I am for us, but the other us's, those are thems. And it's us versus them. And God is actually saying, Abraham, this nation's going to be totally different. It's actually going to be world-centric. It's for all of us. That's my ultimate outcome. That's my heart. Will you join me? And then Jesus just pushes the social edges. I mean, all the way to the end. When he comes, he says things like this. You know, when you go to that guy in prison who's guilty and did really horrible things that he deserves to be in prison for, guess who you're going to meet when you go there? Me. Whatever you do for that guy, you did for me. And then he goes even farther and he says, guess what? Love your enemy. Because guess what? We were God's enemy and he loved us. And when you get that kind of fullness, and I'm telling you, it's just so easy to try to shrink God down and nationalize him and make him belong to us. And when you read the story, you're going to see God blowing that up over and over again. To me, it's so comfortable. It's like God is absolutely a white man, a Republican American, and he and I are so much alike. It's so awesome. And it's so good. Thank you, God, for being exactly like me. And I'm so glad you and I are in the same team against all those other stupid people over there who don't know anything. It's so great for me that you're like me, God. And see, Christians are the people, for example, there's so much bifurcation in our political culture. And it's just easy to stay in our little trenches and we fire sound bites. And there's actually no intelligent debate about the best ideas. And see, it's the people of God who do crazy things like those people that are my enemies. I'm actually going to walk across the aisle. I'm going to walk across that gap, and I'm going to treat them not as my enemy, as my neighbor, to go bless them. So I want to ask you this question. Write it down. This is challenging. Who outside of us are you calling me to bless? It might be that irritating person at work who your views are so different, maybe politically or religiously or whatever. Or you know what, maybe some of you in this room, God has called you on one of these trips this next summer. And you're going to walk with an orphan. And you know what's going to happen if you walk with an orphan for a week and a half? You're going to meet Jesus. And guess what's going to happen to your heart? It's going to get 3 sizes bigger. And you're going to come back and see the whole world different. I wonder what it is that God's calling you to do. And here's the last one. And we're going to have to boogie through this one. The covenant is scandalously graceful. It's scandalously graceful. Now, we need to circle back to this word covenant. Because again, a covenant is a serious deal. It's this binding relationship based on a vow to absolute faithfulness. And God is the covenant maker. He's the one who initiates these promises to Abraham and Sarah. And God's going to keep his part of the covenant. God doesn't have a problem with that. He's 100% faithful. And he promises some really extraordinary things. Like Abraham is old as dirt. His get up and go has got up and went. There's no way this is going to happen. Sarah is just about as old as he is. There's no way they're going to have a baby. And God says, you know what, you're going to have a son. And that's going to be the beginning of this nation. And that just seems impossible. But God, by divine fiat, does it. And there's a miracle. And Sarah becomes pregnant. And God says, name this baby Isaac. And Isaac means he laughs, and that's what everybody did, because that baby was born in the geriatric unit, and it was paid for by Medicaid. And everybody laughed, because Sarah went to the Price Chopper, and she was buying Pampers and Depends at the same time. Everybody laughed, because everyone in that family was eating strained vegetables, and nobody had teeth at all. God did it. And if you've done the pre-reading this week in chapter 2 of the story, let me ask you, how did Abraham do at keeping his side of the covenant? Not so good. Like there's one moment where he runs into this foreign king, and the foreign king thinks Sarah's kind of hot, and he sort of panics, and he's like, oh, her? Oh, she's my sister. You can date her if you want. Hey, guys, if you do that, Valentine's Day is not going to go very well for you. That's like a mistake, you know? And he just keeps doing that over and over again. Abraham can't keep this covenant. And guess what? We can't either. And there's this climactic moment in Genesis 15 where God cuts the covenant with Abraham. In other words, there's a moment in covenant making where it's called cutting a covenant. It's basically where you sign the contract. And how they did it back then, this actually predates Abraham. It goes all the way back into ancient Egyptian culture, and it actually was practiced in the ancient world all the way up to the Greco-Roman time. It's called a blood path. And you would get like a bull, and you would get goats, and you would get birds, and you would literally cut them in half. Not like this way, but like head down. Like literally rip them in half. And you'd lay both sides of the carcass on either side of a trench. You would dig this trench, and the blood would drain down into the trench. It was called a blood path. And both members of the covenant would walk the blood path. And it was a symbol of, this is what will happen to me if I break this covenant. And it's a symbol that God has given us to see what the price tag of our rebellion is. When we choose self, when we choose pride, it ends up ripping us apart. And it leads to all sorts of death, emotional death, relational death, spiritual death, physical death. And what's fascinating about this passage is when Abraham is cutting the covenant, he's actually in this, you can read it in Genesis 15, he's in this weird sleep paralysis mode. He can't move. So when it comes time for him to actually sign the document and walk the blood path, he can't do it. And then what happens is there's a theophany. It's an Old Testament manifestation of Jesus, and it's like a figure walks through, and it's dark, so Abraham can't see clearly, but he can see the fire and the flames. And what that is it's an Old Testament manifestation of Jesus. And Jesus walked the blood path for Abraham, because he couldn't do it. In other words, God was saying, I got this. And guess what? 2,000 years ago, Jesus did the same thing. He walked the blood path at Calvary because he knew we couldn't keep our part of the deal. So he kept it for us. And if we trust him, if we get that divine favor is not something we earn, it's a gift we receive, then we discover our true identity, which is that of the beloved. And see, the story shifted humanity from appeasing works, it's called religion, and it fills you with anxiety because you don't know if you're ever good enough, if you've ever done enough, and it changed it to a story of amazing grace. It's a gift. And here's the question I want you to ask: how can I trust your grace more, Lord? Because Abraham wasn't picked because he was qualified. In fact, here's his secret. It says this about Abraham. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. God is for you. Will you let him love you? Will you choose him and trust him? I want to ask you if you bow your heads with me. And I just want to walk through these three questions, and I want to ask you, by faith, to see Jesus, who is fully present here. And the first question we wrestled with is this: Jesus, how can I take my next step on mission? And so I want to ask you to look to Jesus by faith now and just listen. See what the answer to that question is. Second question is this: Jesus, who is it that is not us that you're calling me to bless? And just listen now, see if he doesn't bring a name or a face to mind. And lastly, Jesus, how can I trust you more? How can I leave my polytheistic anxiety where I'm lifting my soul to my spouse or my boss or my children or my career to try to get my significance there, but instead lift it to you and receive monotheistic love that will help me to rest in a grace. Lord, show us now how we can trust you more.